In this lesson, we're going to expand our previous lesson and look at some more features of the function graphs. And we're going to start by looking at domain, range, and we're going to discuss intervals of increase and decrease, but then we're also going to introduce minimum and maximums. So let's take a look at this graph that I have in front of me right now. What we notice from this graph is that it goes up, and then at the origin it kind of slopes down into a sort of a curve that goes downside, and then at that point it goes up again and it keeps going up, and then slowly the rate of change minimizes. So let's start with the easiest feature. Let's start with the intercepts. What I notice is that this particular graph has two intercepts right there at x equals 4 and x equals 0. And so you can just go ahead and write as 0 or 4, or you can write it as an ordered pair. 0, 4, and 4, 0. When I look for my y-intercepts, on the other hand, I notice that there's only one point where the graph crosses the y-axis, and that is at the origin, 0, 0. So that is my only y-intercept. Next, I'm going to try to identify the domain, and the domain, again, is all the x values that are used by this graph. And what I notice is that my x values in here start with the -4. If you notice, that lower part is your -4, and then it goes all the way up. So I'm going to start my domain as a -4 for the range. When we're looking for domain or range, we're looking for a range of numbers. And I know that I'm using the word range twice, but in this case, I mean two different things. So x equals -4, that's where it starts. And then as I follow the graph, it stops at x equals 6. So my domain is going to be from -4 all the way to 6. And now it's time for me to look for my range. In this case, it's the y values. And so when I look at how the function goes up and down in the y-axis, I notice and I identify that there's a range that this graph stays within, and that would be y is -3, and it goes all the way up to a +2. So that's going to be my range. Again, the range of numbers is going to be y is -3 all the way down to y is 2. And the 2 points that, of course, mark those ranges are going to be my lowest point, which is the -4, -3, and then my uppermost point, which is a 6, 2. And we're going to talk about those points in just a little bit. The next feature I'm going to be looking for is any increasing or decreasing intervals. So a function is said to increase if the x's are increasing when you look through the function from left to right, as if you're reading a book. So in this case, I notice that when x is -4, in this case with the point -4, -3, the function in here, the graph is increasing all the way to the origin, where x is 0. And then it starts going on the opposite direction until x is 2. When x equals 2, then it keeps increasing all the way up to x equals 6. So I have actually two intervals of where this is increasing, from x is -4 to 0, and from 2 to x equals 6. Now when I look for intervals of decrease, that means when is my function going down if I'm going from left to right? I'd identify just one interval. So in this one section, starting where x is 0, all the way down to where x is 2, that is where my function is actually decreasing. So I only have one interval of decrease for this particular function. The last feature that we're going to talk about are minimum and maximum points. So in this graph, I have actually 2 points that are quite low, And so when that happens, when you have more than 1 point, that means you're going to have more than one minimum. And we're going to call them something different. The one that's at the lowest most point, in this case, -4, -3, we're going to call that the absolute minimum. And the one that's minimum also, but not the lowest point, we're going to call that a relative minimum. So let me go ahead and label these on the graph. And of course, we only use the absolute ones to call minimum or maximum. So now I'm going to look for my maximum points for this graph, and I notice that again we have two. One is going to be my absolute point, absolute maximum point. Of course, that's going to be 6, 2, because it's the highest one. And the origin is going to actually be my relative maximum. All right, so that's it. We have this other graph right now, and I would like for you to pause the video and actually try to do this on your own before I give you the answer. Okay, so hopefully you tried it on your own. Let's go ahead and try to figure out the domain. So when I look at all the x values that are in this graph, the first thing I'm noticing is these little arrows tell me that the lines keep going indefinitely up. So basically what I'm looking at is at a negative infinity to a positive infinity, and I regret instantly using this marker because I realize you can't see it that much. So my domain would be negative infinity to positive infinity. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our range now. When I'm looking at my y values in this graph, I notice that I don't use any of the negatives of the y's. So my range of y values are going to start from 0. So from 0 all the way up to a positive infinity. Again, these arrows tell me that this graph is going to go indefinitely up. So that's what my range is going to be. Now I'm going to look at my interval of increase. I notice that actually there's one interval in here, one part of this graph. You may think initially there's two parts, but there's actually just one. Just because the arrows are going up doesn't mean that they're both increasing. Remember, you have to read the graph from left to right as if you were reading a book. So in this case, if I start from my very left, I notice that it's actually going to go down. So that's the decreasing part of this graph. And then once I get to the origin, then at that point, the graph shifts and goes up. So that is the only interval of increase that I'm looking at, and that starts at x equals 0 all the way to positive infinity. On the other hand, my interval of decrease is going to start from I don't know where. So it's going to be negative infinity. It's going to start somewhere out there, but it's going to end at x equals 0. So that's what my interval of decrease is going to be. What I also notice is that I don't have any maximum points. The only point that I have in this graph is a minimum point, and that's an absolute minimum. That's my origin. I don't have any relative minimums. So that's pretty much it. When I look at my intercepts now, I notice that I don't have any. Actually, my x-intercept and my y-intercept are the exact same point. The graph is intercepting the x and the y-axis at the origin. So that would be for both. So the last graph feature that we're going to tackle is the end behavior. So in this case, I want to see how this graph is ending. And actually, because it starts at the origin, it's going to end in two separate directions. So on one end, it's going to approach a negative infinity, and on the other end, approach a positive infinity. Hopefully, this was relatively easy for you. Go ahead and pause the video and try to see if you can do this one. This will actually be our entry ticket for tomorrow.